Well, it's almost like, a show of dominance. From my perspective, something so insignificant, but they're using the force of the federal government and taxation to do it. It's almost like they're just basically showing their dominance.
Right. Well, the federal government was never intended to take state tax money, and it's really the governors that should be standing up here and telling the federal government, no, we're not sending you our money anymore. This is our money. You have your money. We're not sending you our money anymore. But unfortunately, we don't have governors that will do that. So if I could affect something in Congress, get a bill co-sponsored and at least start getting the conversation going. Maybe it's not something that would overwhelmingly pass immediately, but through perseverance, through time, possibly we would pass something, or at least the dialogue would begin, and maybe through my introducing that bill, you'd have a state governor that said, you know what, this guy's right. Maybe the other 50 states are going to continue paying them, but I'm not paying anymore. And all it would take is one governor, and theoretically other governors would follow, and that might help the bill pass also.
Right. Absolutely. Okay, we have some questions from some of the listeners I want to pass on to you now. One of them is bringing up Obama's eligibility. Of course, we know the huge controversy about, is he an American, where was he born, and all this stuff. And I guess, even some higher-ranking political figures have looked into this and not been able to come up with any real answers. And, what are your thoughts on the eligibility issue?
I'm very glad to have that question. Actually, if you look up my name, if you Google search Anthony Tolda and then write the word usurper after my name, a press release shows up that we put out in 2010. There's a keynote speaker at the New York State Constitution Party convention we had here in Long Island, and I brought up the eligibility issue in that speech and also wrote a press release type article to go along with the videos. WorldNet Daily picked up on it, and for somebody that's asking that question or familiar with that issue, WorldNet Daily is pretty much the premier website that covers all of the eligibility issues and candidates that step up, as well as Lieutenant Colonel Terry Lakin, who many people may know refused deployment to Afghanistan until he could be convinced Obama was a proper commander-in-chief, and he spent some time in military prison for it and was released. You could see that WorldNet Daily press release and see where I stand on the issue, and I'll just boil it down. Basically what I said is that I'm thoroughly convinced he's not eligible to hold office, and I also said I want to remove him via process of annulment. And this process of annulment, it's been done to senators before. They were found either that they weren't old enough to hold the office or that they weren't a resident of the state long enough to hold the office, and then they were annulled. They were removed via annulment. And what it meant was every vote they cast became null and void. So say a Senate vote passed and the senator in question happened to be the swing vote, you take that vote away, then all of a sudden it would be instantaneously repealed due to the annulment of that senator. So in the case of Barack Hussein Obama, also known as Barry Soetoro, to remove him via process of annulment, it would undo everything he did. The court appointments, the czars, all the legislation, all the executive orders, everything you could think of. The only part I think we would still get stuck with, unfortunately, would be the debt, because if we defaulted on the debt, that would do us a lot more harm than good.
Right. Now that's, you hear the phrase, if something sounds too good to be true, it probably is. I mean, legally it sounds all good, but it would be such a burden lifted off of the backs of the American people that it does seem too good to be true. I mean, I personally fought the Obamacare for years, and so to have, him out of office and all his legislation reversed, it would be like a new America, and we were not in good shape when he went into office. But compared to where we are now, it would be like a new lease on life. So obviously I wholeheartedly support you in that effort. Now I want to bring another question from our listeners. They want to know where you stand with the issue of medical cannabis or medical marijuana.
Well, I believe it's a state issue, that the states should handle that issue however they feel fit. As we had Connecticut recently approved of medicinal marijuana, And, it's my sincere hope and wish that the federal government doesn't interfere with them the way they've been interfering with California. It's not a federal issue, it's a state issue. And I don't want to restrict the state's possibility to deny people medical marijuana, but I don't want the federal government involved in it. That's where I stand. And if I was in a state legislature and it was up to me what my state would do, I would vote to allow it in the state that I was representing.
Okay. Now, I want you to let me know, Anthony, if the interview goes too long for you, because I probably can ask you questions for quite some time.
Okay.
All right. I want to move on now to the fair tax. I know you support the fair tax, and I imagine probably over 50% of our listeners aren't familiar with what the fair tax is. So can you give some background on that and describe why you support it?
Sure. It's often confused with the flat tax, which is the proposed rate. I think Herman Cain's 999 plan would be a good example of a flat tax. A lot of people get the wrong impression. It is not a flat tax. What it is a consumption tax, and what it would do is, instead of the income tax, it would abolish the income tax. It would abolish the IRS, and so corporations, they wouldn't have to pay an income tax either. So when you think about, corporation or a wealthy individual paying, well over 30% in income taxes, that's a huge burden. And so if you could take that burden off of them, the proposed fair tax is 23%. But because we have a capitalist system, or theoretically we have a capitalist system, if you have business owners in the same industry and they don't have the 30% plus overhead in their income tax anymore, then sooner or later to be able to lower prices. It's estimated by the economists that have looked at this that you've noticed probably about 12% the difference at the cash register when you bought something. If you're in the lowest tax bracket, you're paying more than 12%. So if you're paying taxes, it should be more of a palatable idea to you to only spend perhaps 12% more at the register when you buy something. You'd be able to, of course, save your money also and not pay any taxes, as opposed to the tax level that you're paying now. The only people that really would have something to lose here are the people that aren't paying taxes. Of course, I wouldn't expect it to be popular with somebody that pays no taxes, but it would make it, a lot of people that don't pay taxes, they're not paying taxes because they're unemployed. If you're reducing the burden on corporations and business owners, you're not taking so much of their income, and it makes it easier to hire people, and when they're hired, they could pay lower taxes than they would have paid if they got hired doing something otherwise. So even though people who aren't paying taxes wouldn't wish for this, those people happen to want jobs, it'd be a good thing for them.
Okay, great. Now, going back once again to what I think is really a scourge on humanity, the fractional reserve banking, I know you support auditing the Federal Reserve. Do you think we could get an honest audit of the Federal Reserve? Who would do that? And, what if they come up smelling like roses? What do you do then?
Well, we've already had partial audits, and they didn't come up smelling like roses, and I'm sure there'll be future audits as well. And in fact, their charter runs out in 1913, which I saw Ron Paul pointed out in his speech in Philadelphia that I attended. So another audit, I don't know how much it'll do between now and the time that charter runs out, but I would like to see at least one more thorough audit between now and then, because I think it would make it all that much more likely to get rid of them, to not renew their charter. A lot of people aren't familiar with the charter system. At one point in America, any business of significant size would have to get chartered. They would have to essentially prove or at least appear that they were operating in general to the public's benefit. They weren't some type of a corporate parasite. So if you look at what's gone on, with my industry, or the industry I've been involved in as a financial consultant, dealing with a lot of corporate parasites, and then the government is giving them our taxpayer money. So the charter system was in place to try to prevent that type of a relationship between government and business from happening. And I don't seek to replace it today because I don't think it would work the same way it once did. But we do have an opportunity here with the Federal Reserve charter running out to not renew their charter, and that would get rid of them.
Okay. Now, if we came into a situation where we needed to get rid of the Federal